actually my pleasure to introduce today Christine Wilson, who is the Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at the University of Maine, Farmington. She's been with us for nearly 2 years. She came in July of 2019 and has taught in the higher education doctoral program at the New England College for the past 5 years. Before coming to UMF, she served as Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and was an adjunct faculty member in the Higher Education and Student Affairs Master's Program at the University of Connecticut for 13 years. Her research focuses on student experiences as leaders and activists, preparing people to teach and lead in diverse environments and restorative practices. Her PhD is from the University of Rhode Island, so she has some deep New England roots, though like myself, she's a Midwesterner transplant, having grown up in Northwestern Indiana at the intersection of the steel mill and farmlands. So please help me welcome Christine Wilson.
Thank you, everyone. Really glad to be here this morning. Love seeing all the friendly faces around the screen. So I thought that I would talk this morning about the impact that COVID has had on our students. So the first thing I need to do is apologize to Linda, Lisa, and Kirsten, because you've probably heard everything I'm going to say about 100 times already. So that's both bad for you, but also good for your Rotary colleagues, because if I forget anything, you can chime right in and add to what I'll share. I know that Keenan, our good colleague Keenan, was with you last time talking about some of the things that we had done, and Keenan and I's work overlaps a lot. So hopefully by me talking with you about this today, you'll get a little bit of a bigger picture of what's been going on campus. So our focus with the students has really been on safety and protection, keeping them safe, protecting them, and all that goes along with that, but then also knowing that we have a responsibility to safety and protection of the greater community. So I'm going to talk about several areas in that, but before I get to that, I thought it might be interesting for you to hear a little bit about the anatomy of a positive case. What happens when we find out that one of our community members is positive? And then once I go through that, I'll talk about the impact on our students of COVID financially, academically, in student life, and then talk a little bit about our testing program and how people have reacted to that. So as you know, we've been involved in asymptomatic testing since about the middle of last August. We've used multiple companies to do the testing. Right now, we're actually in a place where we're doing our own testing, and multiple companies to do the testing analysis. Most of our time last semester was spent with a company called Vault out of Rutgers. And this semester, they've built labs at Orono to do the analysis of the tests. So throughout this entire time, we could get a positive case at any moment, right? So 24/7, we'll get a little ping. I've learned to have a little jolt every time the ping comes in as a text or an email. And so the first thing that happens when we get one of those is Keenan, whom you met, Tiff Miori, who I'm sure you all know, Lori Gardner, who's the CBO here at Farmington, and also our incident commander. We all get on a Zoom call together. So we've seen each other at our worst, right? Nobody's getting dressed up to get on a Zoom call at 1 in the morning. So we get on the phone together, and then we start to look at the information. Who is this person? It's usually a student. Do they live on campus? Do they live off campus? Do they live on campus? Do they have roommates? Are they a student athlete? What's their phone number, etc.? We start to gather information so that we can put it into the Maine Sarah Alert database, which you probably know is the database that we use, the state uses to track cases. So the four of us are on the phone, and then once we have gathered information, I'm the person who reaches out to the student. Usually I'll call them first And it may not surprise you to know that people who live on their phones don't usually answer the phone when they don't know who it is. A lot of our students don't even talk on the phone anymore. So for the most part, there's no answer to the phone call, but I will text them, tell them who I am, ask them to call me. Sometimes I'll also email just in case they're up studying, something like that. And there have been multiple cases where I've actually suited up with my personal protective equipment and visited a student to let them know that they have tested positive. So we do a quick interview to determine if there are any immediate close contacts, like a roommate or something. So we do a quick interview, and then if they're on campus, we will move them to our quarantine or isolation hall. You can imagine that at this point, it's very stressful for the students to know that they would have to pack up for 10 days and move. They have worries about how they're going to eat. They have worries about their classes, all kinds of things like that. So we spend a lot of time talking them through that. But by the time we get someone over to Dakin, by the time our campus police has moved their belongings and we've walked them over there and gotten into their room, they're calmer and able to sort of talk through what's going to happen. Then our next wave happens. Sometimes there's no close contacts. Sometimes there could be 15. And so each one of those people, we go through the same thing: email, call, text, try to get a hold of them, figure out if they can quarantine where they are, or if they need to be moved into isolation, or quarantine, our quarantine hall. So if they're living off campus, most people aren't saying things like, sure, I'll come to Dakin to hang out for 10 days in a residence hall. But we do have to take into account that somebody isolating or quarantining in an off-campus place sometimes compromises the people in that space, right? It could be that maybe someone's employed in a place where they're not allowed to be in the case or in a house with somebody like that. That might mean they can't go to work, which could compromise their employment. Somebody might be immune compromised. So sometimes there's a lot of back and forth with positive cases and close contacts. They'll, say something like, oh, it's okay. I talked to my family and they're okay with me staying here. And a couple hours later, they'll say, no, I'm not, I can't stay here. Can I move onto campus? We've also tripped over multiple students who are couch surfing, which is a nice way of saying they're actually homeless, just going from place to place to try and stay close to campus while they're pursuing their degree work. So these things are complicated. You might be able to take care of one of these cases from the time you get the call in an hour if it's one person and they live off campus alone and there are no close contacts. But it could take 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours to track down all of the close contacts, figure out where they are, get all the information to Sarah Alert. And then before I close up shop for the night, I'll look up all the professors because we want to notify all the professors, which is an interesting thing to do when it's someone's protected medical information, to tell them that their students are isolating or quarantining. By now, most people know when they get that vague email from me. Linda, I don't know if I've ever sent one to you, like a vague email that they get the gist of it and they know what has to happen. But then there's a cascade of things that happen. We do have a group of peer care managers who take care of our students to make sure that they're fed. We work with dining to make sure that no matter what their dining plan is, they get 3 meals a day in our quarantine and isolation hall. I often feel bad for the professors, particularly the professors who are teaching in-person classes, because someone may have to be virtual for 2 weeks and maybe those instructors aren't set up for that. So it's been very hard on the professors. So there are these student impacts, but then there are these cascade impacts. Our student health center does contact the students regularly. If they're on campus, we do follow-up testing at a 5-day window. So, and then on the other end of it, we arrange to help them move back. It's just hilarious to escort a student out of quarantine, while they're, especially now that the weather's nice. I don't think it was so bad in the winter when they were in there, but now that it's nice outside, it's like they'll run out and talk about tasting freedom. It's very interesting. So most people don't have any idea of how complicated and all the things that have to go into that are, but at any given time, we'll have a small set of people in isolation and a much bigger set of people who are close contacts. As the trajectory of the virus has changed in our county, we're a lot less likely to have someone test positive or be a close contact for our program. We'll hear about it from outside, right? Somebody will say, oh, this is a student teacher in this school, and that whole classroom has had to go virtual. So then we're putting people into quarantine who are in a practicum or student teaching at a school. So that's what's been more likely for us lately as the variants make their way very rapidly around our county. So, but our positivity rate on campus is very low, but it's still a constant task to keep up. And like I said, we could get notified at any minute. And I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure there have been times when I've been meeting with Lisa or Kirsten when it's like, got the call, got the ping, gotta go. So, so that's just a little bit about an anatomy of a positive case. Before I talk more about the impact of our students, does anybody have any questions about any of those things specifically?
How do you ever have time to do your job?
We actually don't. It's been a very challenging year, and I've said this to Kirsten and Lisa before that that the president and I have been more in the business of pandemic management than our actual jobs since we both arrived in the summer of 2019. You know, there just really isn't time to do all the things that we should be doing when the focus is on that protection and safety, you know, and making sure that people are where they need to be. So that, I mean, every time this happens in my head, I'm like, most important thing right now is to get them to a safe place to stop the spread. Safe place, stop the spread, those kinds of things. So hopefully with the vaccine, so the way they're going, that we'll get to a place in the fall where we have either a lot of people vaccinated or herd immunity, that we can get back to the regular business of our work more fully. I'm very much looking forward to that.
You're not enjoying the 3 a.m. move student to Dakin?
You know, anytime I feel sorry for myself about that, I think I'm not the person who's going to be in Dakin for the next 10 days, right? I get to go home to my nice place, and they are, you know, looking at those four walls, wondering what they forgot. You know, usually it's a charger, in case you're interested. We have on using the video function to make sure that we're protecting their property, but also to get them what they need, taken our phones and gone into rooms and said, where's the thing you need? While they're in Dakin, yes. So, but I'm not the one who's spent my time there. Okay. All right, well then I'll move on. Certainly if you have any more questions about that, I'll be glad to answer them at the end about the impact of this on our students. And I'm sure a lot of this won't surprise you because these aren't things that are being felt exclusively by our students. But insofar as we're right here in the community, like what they're experiencing, oftentimes the community is also experiencing. First of all, there's been an enormous financial impact, right? You probably know that there's a lag in when someone submits information for a financial aid form and then get financial aid, and what's the year that the financial aid is applied. And so for a lot of our students, the amount of financial aid that they got depended on pre-COVID numbers, but COVID has had a huge impact on their finances, right? And family finances. So there are, you know, the fewer people there are around, the fewer jobs that are available, the fewer hours there are for jobs. And so the same thing has happened with families. Families aren't able to contribute as much because people's employment has been compromised all around the state. So there's just less money for them to meet that family contribution or to be able to pay their bills. Luckily, we've had federal funds called CARES or emergency funds to fill that gap. But again, that's like, you know what it's like to manage a federal program. Like, it's more paperwork than than anything else. But we have been able to put, as of today, $1.6 million directly into the hands of our students to help offset some of these financial challenges. So, so this has caused a lot of our students to move home, saying, I can't afford to live on campus. So they've moved home, which changes their lives greatly. We've had a lot of students who have moved out of their local apartments. So there is an entire system of subletting going on off campus where people have rented an apartment, but now they can't afford that apartment. So other people have moved in there. You know, at the beginning of, in the middle of last summer in July, there was almost no rental stock available in town, and our residence hall was full. And that's just changed dramatically from not even a year ago. Another thing that's happened is that as students have had more financial trouble, they've actually worked more hours. So for our students who have moved home, many of them had jobs at home in high school, but they'll take that job again. They're actually working more hours. I think it's easier to work more hours when you're at home and not on campus moving about. So we actually have students who are working far more hours, which then in turn impacts their academics. It's just easier to take on those more hours when they're offered to you. So we do have, I'm the one who reads all the emergency applications. We do have people who have not been able to find enough hours, but we also have students who have told me that they're either dropping classes or withdrawing for the semester because they're working too many hours and they just need that money, maybe not just for their education, but also to support their families. We even have a few situations where, very few, but where families have moved in with the students into their apartments because they've lost their own housing off campus. So there you see these pockets of horrible, horrible stories. In terms of their academics, I think it was in the beginning, we had this idea that it was going to be like some classes will be in person and some classes will be virtual and some will be hybrid. But even the definition of hybrid became confusing, right? And so, and then because people have to want to attend a class when they're asymptomatic and in quarantine or isolation, like I mentioned earlier with the positive case, what this has turned into is an unwritten expectation that all classes will be able to be in person if they started out that way or virtual all at the same time. And then there are students who will say things like, I'm going to Zoom in this week. And it's created this odd culture of choose your own adventure, modality wise. And it's very challenging for the instructors, but it's created a very interesting culture among the students. And then there's a tipping point. So even if you have in-person classes, if you can Zoom in, and then if other classes end up just going virtual because so many students have asked for or needed to be virtual, then kind of what's the point of going in person at all? And if you're not going to classes in person at all, then why are you living on campus or why are you living near campus? And so there's been no point of stability this year. People are making decisions about their classes, pushing those modalities, and then to their limits, really, as people try to be understanding about what's going on. There's just been changes every single week. Usually with our residence halls, for example, people will move in and then we'll have a trickle out, right? Because things will change along the semester. That's normal. But we've had steady out all year as people are making new decisions about where they're going to live, where they're going to study, what they're going to do, where they're going to work. It's very disruptive. It's disruptive administratively, it's disruptive financially, but for the students, it's disruptive, but it's also an evolving kind of flexibility that's hard to wrap your heads around. I would at best call it a phenomenon at this time. The same thing goes for student life in general. When we said we were going to be back with social distancing and masking, which is pretty much how we talked about it all last summer, I think people understood that intellectually, but that's a far cry from what it's actually like to live in that environment. So we had people who were like, why are you even doing this? This is ridiculous that you would even ask to social distance and mask, all the way to the other end where students were like, why are you even coming back? That's so irresponsible. And there were perspectives and emotions all along that continuum, and continue to be, actually. And so it's one thing to say, sure, I'm having my in-person classes, but I'm getting to live in my residence halls. But to have to wear that mask everywhere when you're outside of your room, and to take most of your meals in a little to-go bag, cute as it is, from Sodexo, out of the hall every day to go back to your room. And we're under 50% occupancy right now. So that means many of our students are in singles, is very lonely. And it's a grind. It's an absolute grind. So, you know, if you know that one of your fellow residence hall residents is sick, it's a completely different reaction. Before, you might have been empathetic, let me bring you some soup. Now it's like, oh my God, have they been in the bathroom? Should I go to the bathroom? Right? Like, it's nerve-wracking in a completely different way. And so in retrospect, it does not surprise me that many of our students have chosen to leave the hall, right? Either because their classes have gone virtual or they don't feel safe. I think it's just that there's no sense of control in there like there used to be. So as more students move off campus, as more students move out of the residence halls, you know, it makes the people who are left here question what they're doing. We've had multiple students over the past few weeks say, I'm just too lonely. I feel too isolated. It's making me anxious. So that's what I mean. It's evolving, this cascade of their experiences all year. Even to operate as a club. And Kirsten knows this very well, right? So we're back, our clubs can operate. Okay, that's great, but they got to operate in COVID. And a lot of what they wanted to do, we didn't even have a roadmap to figure out how to do it, right? Like, what does a club sport, something as innocuous sounding as like ultimate frisbee, how does that even operate in COVID with COVID regulations? And so it's been a really big challenge for them. They came back, they were excited to be back, and now they're saying things to us like, I really thought it was going to be different. What did you think it was going to be like? I don't know, but not this. I think we all kind of feel that way, that what does back mean? And what does operating mean? And what does it mean to be here? What I can say from our students' perspective is that it's hard, it's lonely, it's isolating, it's nerve-wracking, and it's not fun. And so many of them are glad to be back. For many of our students, they don't have a safe place to be at home, or they don't have what they really need, wireless, broadband internet. Lots of students taking classes on their phones. So for some of them, it's actually a better deal to be here, but that doesn't mean it's still not hard and lonely and all those things. So, so I think, again, like, everybody knows that we're focused on safety and protection, but it's come at an incredibly high price. Not that we would do anything different, but it's just been a huge challenge. So we have 3 weeks left of our testing program. I can't say, well, for this year on this kind of scale, never did I think I would turn into a public health official, but I have to say, the students and the staff have been great to work with, no matter how hard it's been, no matter how negative the impact, no matter how upsetting or challenging of phone calls we've had to have with students and parents and other kinds of constituents. We're still doing okay, right? Not to invoke another school, but I'll say it here, we're not Bates, where we have dozens and dozens and dozens of cases and we're locking down things. Like, that's not our situation. You know, I've had very few students that I've talked to, hundreds of students this year, about being positive or close contacts. For the most part, even if they're very upset at first, they're like, okay, I get it. I'm going to do what's right. So I'm really proud of our students, proud of them working through things. Most of them do not react. They reflect, they ask a lot of questions, but I'm proud of them and what we've been able to do in this completely, you know, unexpected situation. So the impact on them has been challenging and negative, but they've persisted. And I'm really looking forward to our graduation, the way we're doing graduation, that we're actually gonna be able to celebrate some people in a few weeks here. So I'm gonna stop there and ask if anybody has any reactions or any questions about any of this.
Dennis O'Neill's got a question.
Excuse me. Yes, I'm just wondering, in view of the isolation and the issues and so forth, have you been ramping up any kind of psychological help or counseling? Or I assume that has to go hand in hand, not just
Yep.
with the isolation, but dealing with the whole student population that's impacted by it.
Yep. Yeah, we actually early on, so last March and April, our counseling center jumped on the opportunity to do telemental health, right? And that involves a lot of licensing and changes in how you protect information and those kinds of things. So we wanted to be able to serve our students no matter where they were. So our counseling center got telehealth ramped up. And then we had a little bit of grant money to hire an additional counselor. So instead of trying to get a full-time in-person person, we took the opportunity to split it up into part-time work so that we could get some people who may want to add it as a side hustle or a part-time job, and they could be anywhere in the country and we could license them to be here. So we did two things. We got in the business of telemental health, and we changed how we look at counseling jobs to try and bring in some expertise, widen our pool, so to speak, and to address some specific student demographic issues. So yes, we think about that all the time. And our counseling services have done a great job keeping up with their caseloads. And they're now in the business of transitioning, because the licensing boards were like super flexible last summer, but now it's back to, okay, you can't serve someone if they're out of state. So they're in the business of making transition plans for the students they're serving now to get good care over the summer. So.
Thank you. Your presentation was certainly eye-opening, that no concept of just how difficult this is on students. I just try to keep from hitting them when I go down High Street and they're jumping in and out of traffic. But that very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dick Davis has a question.
Yes, now that the vaccine has been opened up to everyone 16 and over, are you encouraging the students to get vaccinated? And is there any possibility of having a vaccination site on campus, say in South Dining Hall?
So we're part of a University of Maine system initiative to encourage people to get the vaccine. We are connecting our students through social media and websites with local vaccination opportunities. For the moment, we're not having vaccination clinics on campus, and that's because that is perceived as giving our students a special benefit that other people don't have. And so for the moment, philosophically, we've been told not to do that. So I could probably argue that either way, but for now, that's where we're operating. So my biggest challenge right now is that we have students who want to get vaccinated, like Franklin. The hospital has been great at, here, please advertise this stuff. We've had other people send us information about clinics. Our biggest challenge now is that we don't have transportation to these places. So we have students who want to get there to get a vaccination, but we can't operate our shuttle service in COVID times. And even if we wanted to get it ramped up now, it would be like a week left of school. So we are encouraging folks to get the vaccine, and we're not having our own clinics, and our biggest issue is transportation. Yeah.
Good. Any other questions for Dr. Wilson?
I have one, Charlie.
Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. This was wonderful. I really appreciate your information. This is maybe a question for you as well as Lisa Elrich. The impact of COVID on future enrollment. What's it looking like? You know, I know you don't have a crystal ball at the moment, but can you give us some insight?
Sure, but we do have a lot of data, which is just as good as a crystal ball. So actually, Lisa and I were just talking about this last night, weren't we? About how, okay, I'm going to say, I don't want to say it too much out loud, but
Everybody knock on wood.
yeah, please do. Our numbers for the fall for both our returning students in terms of enrolling in classes and our new student matriculation, people who have committed to coming here, is actually better than it was last year at this time.
Good.
Would you say that's fair? I don't want to say, like, honest to God, I'm so superstitious. I'm like, I don't want to.
I know.
So like,
I would say that's fair, but the interesting phenomenon is the increase in out-of-state students that
yes,
we are experiencing, as well as our sister institutions in the Maine system. It's kind of crazy. You know, last night alone, I see them when they come in. I had a student from Las Vegas confirm, and we had a student from Utah, maybe, I can't remember. There was someplace else that, you know, is sort of off the track for where we have students coming from. But, and it's not just New England. I mean, you know, it's those far outlier places, you know, California, Texas, those types of things that we're seeing. But, you know, because Maine has done such a good job, and it feels like a safe place. You know, Sue knows, she's had influx of families coming into her school because they've moved to their other house over to Sunday River. So they've been, you know, making her little elementary school like blow up. So, you know, we're going to sort of experience that same thing. And I know there's faculty out there who are like, how do we get more people to move to Maine? And I'm like, well, it's really not quite the solution to the, you know, the declining demographics of high school students. You know, number of high school students in Maine, but it's a good idea. But, you know, and it's hard to know how long that sort of, you know, Maine looks great, you know, sort of thing is going to hang around with COVID. You know, it's just hard to know with, you know, everything that's so unknown. So
Thank you.
One thing is certain though, Lisa's staff has been amazing, right, at transforming a business that was based a lot on travel to all virtual things, and right away too, right away last March was on board with like, how can we transform what we do, and has done a great job, and really focused on what people want. Like you got to imagine how difficult it would be to commit to going somewhere when you haven't seen the place. So how could we do tours and visit safely in COVID? Like they've really pushed the limits, done great stretch and imagination to try and get people to be able to make their decisions with the information that they want. So I love working with people who are like, okay, we're about safety and protection. What can we do to have a win-win-win? So thank you, Lisa and company.
Ann Yorks had a question.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same question that Lisa asked, and happy to hear the response.
yeah, and everybody knock on wood or do whatever you got to do. So
Yeah, because we talk a lot, like, is the curve going to keep on the same trajectory, or has the curve just moved earlier? So, and when I say curve, it's because we're looking at charts of applications and admits. And actually, we should tell people that too, Lisa, that we were the first school to move our financial aid packaging earlier in the system.
Yep.
Right. So not this year, but the year before, we had moved packaging from March to November so that folks would know what they were getting. They could make an earlier decision, and then making the time that people applied to when we admitted them shorter. So again, so they would know sooner without compromising the integrity of the admissions process. I think it's easy to admit folks when you don't even read their applications, but Lisa and her staff read. We still have recommendation letters. So they're actually speeding things up, but maintaining the integrity of the process. So
you'd be surprised how many institutions don't require letters of recommendation or even an essay at this point. And we use that information because it's really, really important to sort of learn more about the student, figure out, you know, different areas that they might want to connect with, or support services that are going to be really important to try to make sure that they're aware of and connect them with. So my staff knows the minute an application becomes complete, the goal is 48-hour turnaround to them being able to have a letter that's being generated and potentially a phone call from one of us saying congratulations. So
Dennis O'Neill has a question.
So obviously you live in the Chinese curse of this is the most interesting time for you. But in your experience, I was just curious, going back to your UConn days, that did you help recruit the basketball players that have put UConn on the map? Then
No, although I have a claim to fame in that the year that UConn won the 4 women's championships in a row, I was at all 4 of them.
Ah,
So no,
good seats because of where you worked, right?
no, not at all. Actually, all paid for. It was no. I would have. It was amazing, but athletics at UConn it might as well be a separate campus. It's just such a huge own entity. So they have their own advisors. Like it's like celebrity. It was like a celebrity campus, but it was a blast. And the players were amazing. And anytime they were in things that were in my realm, right? Like in a club or an organization and they needed to come in and do some paperwork, like it was truly like we were being visited by celebrities. Staff would get up the cameras and take pictures. But it was they were delightful. So I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Sue Pratt had a question.
All right, so it's not so much of a question as a comment. I'm hoping that out of that good, steady, strong enrollment that you've got coming in, there's a lot of education majors. I heard yesterday that there were only 34 student teachers going into the field in September, and there's way more than 34 people in Franklin County coming out of the profession. So, you know, I just hope that we're still promoting that because it is a huge impact right now.
I can tell you we certainly are. That's the easiest, area for us to actually promote in so many ways because there's so much, history and, data and, field work and all of those things to promote. It's a pretty hard sell to a student coming out of high school right now, unfortunately, and not just in Maine, but, nationwide. If you try to look at different search organizations that we typically will, license names from, to, with College Board, for instance, SATs, the numbers have been steadily declining of the students who are saying they have an interest in education. So it's a tough one. And we struggle with it all the time. Not quite sure how to turn that around. And then of course, some of them have had some, they've had some phenomenal teachers that have gotten them through this COVID, and other ones have had just not a great experience these past 18 months or so. So they're pretty disheartened with that in general. So it's tough, but Sue, if we can have any ideas, I'm happy to hear them. So
thank you.
Okay, Lisa Laughlin has a question.
So that said, Lisa, are there upticks in any other programs, community health, for example?
School health ed PE combo that we now have with UMPI. They had the PE part, we have the school health part. That is showing incredible potential and growth in its first year. Actuarial science is up, outdoor rec is up. Those are the areas that, and I think you're going to see, we'll talk about, we'll probably have to have Edward and maybe Christine come back and talk about the strategic plan once it drops, but I think you're going to see a big kind of shift and push towards, making sure there's a direct connection for folks to be able to see a degree in, history and outcomes for that. So, and that's the part we struggle with sometimes with, especially Maine kids. They think a degree equals X career. And, if you're a teacher, that's easy. If you're going into nursing, that makes sense. If you're going to get a history degree, what am I going to do with that? And with such a big population of first gen students, that's even harder sell to their parents because it's really hard for them to sort of think outside the box in that way sometimes. So I think you're going to see a big shift there, but those fields that have that sort of direct, here's what I'm going to go out and do, are the big risers. This year was our first year having a collaborative program with the University of Maine at Augusta for nursing. So this was our first sort of dipping our toes in that area. Students will live on our campus, but take some of our courses, but to their nursing courses through UMA. Didn't like the way the application process was set up because technically we had to then tell them, well, you have to apply to UMA for the program. So their director and I have worked on that, and they're going to apply directly to Farmington next year. And we've got one other little hurdle. If we can get through it, then those students would be able to be nursing majors at Farmington through this collaborative program, but still be able to compete in our D3 athletics, because that's a little bit of a bump right now. They can't be a UMA student and be one of our D3 athletes. And it would be a great fit for some students out there to be able to be here and get that degree. So we're the only school technically in the UMaine system that doesn't have a nursing program. So hopefully that will help. You know, we typically, a lot of times students say they want to be a nurse. They really don't. They think that's what they know. So they sort of gravitate towards that, but they'd be just as well served in our community health program. But that's a hard sort of swap to make for a student sometimes too. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, Dr. Wilson, on behalf of Farmington Rotary, want to thank you for sharing a very interesting perspective and on how this COVID has affected the students. Again, I don't think anybody had any idea just how much of an impact it's had to the individual students and to your staff. And on behalf of Farmington Rotary, thank you generously for sharing your valuable time and knowledge with us.
Thank you. Very glad to be here and talk it through. So there's a lot to be gained from mutual understanding. So I hope there's an opportunity for us to hear how this has impacted your lives too, and your businesses and your organizations. It would be good for us to know that also. So thank you for your time.